Namaskar and welcome to National Security Talks with me. I am Arpan Chakravarti, and in this episode of our conversation today, we have with ourselves Mr. Abhinav Pandya, who is the founder and CEO of Usasana's Foundation, an Udaipur-based think tank. Today, our focus shall be on the internal security dimension, which is revolving around radicalization. Since a few months, radicalization has been on a rise, and there is a lot of organizations which have been consistent since then. PFI is among one, Popular Front of India, the organization which has been on the forefront since a long time. They have been linked from terrorism to the recent hijab row violence, from radicalization to anti-government activities, from communal troublemaking to links to banned organizations. They have been consistent. Since 2017, this group has been named in Hadia case, Sri Lanka's Easter bombing case, Mangalore violence case, Delhi riots, Hathras gang rape case, mobilizing money during the anti-CAA protest, and Kerala gold smuggling racket as well. Name it, and they are there. At this point of time, they are working very systematically. They have lawyers at their disposal. Politically, they have a wing which contests elections, and they have a band of writers who academically challenge the notions in society. One has to note that the counter-terrorism and counter-radicalization division of the Ministry of Home Affairs usually takes cognizance of these kind of matters as they decide which organizations are to be banned and which aren't. Therefore, at this point of time, we have an expert on radicalization who has authored various books on research, and he shall help us understand the national as well as international facets of national security. Mr. Abhinav, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We welcome you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arpan, for inviting on this crucial topic of discussion today. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So, sir, yesterday we saw a lot of an incidents, and we have been seeing the disturbances across India. So, what do you suggest? What is these kind of threats which are continuously arising across India? How do you evaluate those things?
Well, as a researcher and as a security analyst, I always prefer to go back into the history for analyzing such developments, which I'll certainly do in the later part of my discussion, because it's a longer journey back in time. But I must say that ever since BJP has won the UP election, there has been a very strong accumulation of this radicalization, the jihadist and Islamist radicalization tendencies across the country. And in the recent spurt, I blame many developments in the near past for this sudden spurt in the radicalization. Okay? I must say that the return of Taliban back into power has kind of motivated these Islamist organizations and also a large segment of Muslims across the country and the entire South Asia, I must say. Because the Taliban has already set up an example how to bring an Islamic government by defeating a superpower. Secondly, because over the last few years, Pakistan has been kind of reined in, as you saw that after the application of Article 370, Pakistan could not orchestrate a large-scale terror attack or unrest in Kashmir because of this government's very harsh and tough policies against terrorism in Kashmir and against Pakistan. They know it well that if they repeat some kind of a Pulwama or something pattern on Pulwama, certainly the retaliation this time is going to be a notch higher than what we did in Balakot, and they cannot afford that. Besides that, there is a very strong constructive track-to dialogue going between the two countries. So given that the local Islamist groups have realized that they're not going to get much, I would say, support or backing from the neighborhood, or possibly if they are caught or if they get, then it can have bigger consequences, and maybe the neighborhood is not willing to take that much of risk. But then it's not the end here. It's about a much larger cause of jihad and establishing a Sharia-based society which inspires them. And the local groups like PFI, which is, I would say, definitely a cornerstone of Islamic radicalization in India, it is a pan-Islamist groups, and it has like a transnational character and certainly transnational ambitions also. And they feel that if they don't heat up things right now, then they would lose their chance. And after the UP BJP's victory in the UP election, they feel that I mean this is the time where they should really fight back or assert their identity and at least get on the streets, because this is the time just to to whip up things and and just to get to that bloody violent mode. And that's what we saw in the recent past, especially what happened in that hijab row. Completely uh, I would say unreasonable demands, and they make no sense. Like someone asking to allow them to wear hijab in the normal schools. It never happened in India. Never happened in a country which is governed by rules and regulations. So you'll see much more of such violence. In the last few days, we saw peaceful Hindu processions being targeted with molotovs and petrol bombs and stones and everything. So this is a very tried and tested model which is happening in India. And before I end this first part of my argument, I would like to mention one interesting aspect here. It seems that globally, I mean, I may not have enough evidence to prove it, but certainly there is enough circumstantial evidence to argue that, and reasonably argue that there is an ulterior agenda to embarrass India at the global level. These Islamist groups have realized that, I mean, definitely Modi is a very powerful force in the country, and especially in the Modi government, national security is a key issue. India is making progress by leaps and bounds, with strong ties with Israel and also emerging as a global leader in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. So the only way to embarrass India is to create a big human rights situation, embarrassing situation internally. And how they can do that? They're wanting to provoke the Muslims to, I would say, just explode into a communal frenzy. And their intellectual warriors, the intellectual jihadis, are creating a narrative at a global scale that India is on the verge of genocide. You will see in the recent past, you will see many intellectual jihadis, like people like Rana Ayub, posting that please pray for the 200 million Muslims of India who are facing genocidal conditions from the Hindutva brigade.
So my question is, there has been a change in modus operandi, how terrorists do work. They are rather looking for a local terrorist rather than going for a foreign terrorist who cross borders and come and set up their base. So how do you look at that particular kind of terrorism? And along with that, the kind of radicalization that we see in the mosques and all the madrasas, how do you deal with these kind of radical narratives?
Well, in Kashmir, I must say that this game of radicalization has already been played, and it has been played pretty well. It has already happened. So, but currently the terrorist and militant groups seem to be on the back foot, because after the application of 370, they were expecting a lot, but because of the harsh crackdown by the government, nothing happened. And I guess it's a very successful model of containing these terrorist groups. So now they're trying to revive these, ramp up the militancy activities. And they know that, if there's any major international involvement, certainly it's going to create a Pulwama-like situation. And Pakistan is not in the position to afford massive retaliation from India or even a conventional war. So they're trying in desperation to encourage the local militants to enroll for these terrorist groups and create and just keep coming out with these sporadic incidents of militancy and just to show their presence. But I see more of see it more as a manifestation of frustration. But certainly we should not be docile, and we should not be careless, because Kashmir, we can already feel the presence of the pan-Islamist groups and pan-Islamist tendencies like those of Al-Qaeda. You have local affiliates of these groups, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and I don't know to what extent the relationship is, what is the degree of the strength of the relationship, but certainly these nexuses are there. And some people doubt the extent of the relationship between the pan-Islamist groups and the Kashmiri groups. But as a matter of fact, I must put it on record that Kashmiri militants are being trained in Afghanistan since mid-1980s. So even if these linkages are quite strong, we should not be surprised. But yes, in Kashmir, if government continues with this harsh crackdown and zero tolerance policy to terror, things will be better. And you have to make sure that there's no outburst of a popular agitation, because that's what they are wanting now. They know that this militant activities or a major suicide bombing attack, it's a little far-fetched idea because of the geopolitical dynamics between the two countries. But then, yes, what they can do is that they would try to catapult the local people, to encourage the people to burst into some kind of a massive popular agitation, coming on the roads with violence and with stone pelting and blocking the roads. And at the same time, if so happens, at a certain other extreme level, they might encourage the Pak army to create some activity on the borders, or with that, infiltrate a major chunk of militants into the Kashmir territory. Yes.
But sir, we have consistently seen that the number of stone pelting activities in Kashmir has drastically reduced. And moreover, we are also seeing the emergence of one more factor, and the whole concept of white collar jihadists. And we see academicians coming from Turkey who are being trained in Turkey, and they are coming to Kashmir and they are trying to propagate their own understanding. So, sir, how do you deal with such narratives, such radical narratives, and especially what will be the lessons that the Indian investigative agencies are looking after at this point of time?
Well, once again, I must say that when you have a hard brute force, ready to blow you, knock you down, for your terror activities, and that you cannot afford to get into hard kinetic action in the main territory, you try to compensate that by keeping the Kashmir issue alive and internationalizing it by projecting some Islamist narratives and preparing an army of intellectual jihadis. That's what these people are doing now. Turkey is a major participant in that, and they have these paid stooges, and it's not only in Turkey. You have a major segment of intellectuals in India also sitting right in the capital, who are trying to condone these jihadist elements, or maybe even support them, or maybe even justify their activities and all. But I guess at this stage, personally, I feel that certainly we should have a robust narrative warfare, but then we should be very clear and firm. We don't even wish to engage you in any kind of narrative warfare also. We are very firm and good with that. And you should have a very robust legal mechanism that any intellectual or any journalist trying to justify or protect or defend such totalitarian and such extremist ideologies, they should be booked, they should be taken to task. And intelligence agencies will have to function very strongly. And one more thing, most of the time we are bothered about India's image as a democratic country in the Western world. We don't need to do that, frankly speaking. Okay, we should now cultivate some spine and some guts to that to show that yes, democracy has an entirely different model of functioning in my country. You see, next door neighbor China, they had this terrorism problem in Xinjiang, and they have created a system where they consider they are sending the Uyghur terrorists to the internment camps, the concentration camps. We are not going to that extent, but yes, we have an entirely different setup in India. We have so much diversity, so we cannot be always be satisfying the Western expectations of just quote unquote fulfilling their human rights standards and all. And we should be firm and confident with dealing with them. And if that involves some very harsh kinetic measures, go ahead with that. No need to provide any explanations and apologies to the Western world.
So, sir, as we see in radicalization, that specific communities do get radicalized, and these communities are marginal in our country. We have seen special cases in West Bengal. We have seen it in Kerala. We are seeing it in Assam as well. But after the government robust measures, these activities have been going down. But still, these organizations, they work with an ulterior motive. So, sir, how do we manage these kind of things when there's no army per se, but it is on the local investigative agencies, the authorities who will have to manage? How do you think we should be having a strategy in that perspective?
Well, let me say, it's majorly a problem with this radicalization problem is more with in general, it's with all communities, all societies, and people belonging to all religions. But in particular, this is the problem with Abrahamic faiths, because especially in Christianity and Islam, the idea is to proselytize and expand your faith. I mean, mainly through conversions. But of late, I mean, especially in the Christian world, it has been through the missionary activity, and things have really changed in Europe. People have mostly turned towards atheism, rather, I must say. And even if these missionary activities or conversions are taking place, they are taking place either through some charity work or maybe through lure of money and all. But in the Islamic world, this goes a step higher, a much higher. They not only, I mean, it's not just about the proselytization, conversion, but they want to impose a very religion-centric worldview, and that is a Sharia-centric worldview on free societies. And that's a very totalitarian way of looking at the world. And they believe that, especially the Sunni extremist groups, that if any society that doesn't conform to their belief system and people don't convert to their religious values or religious systems, then they are wajibul qatl. They deserve to be eliminated, killed. They are kafirs. So that's the mindset, and it's not something which has happened or which has taken birth in the recent past. It has been existent over the last 1400 years, and we can go back in history. When was the first suicide bombing that took place in India? It was back in 16th and 17th century in the Malabar region, not 20, 30 years back. When was, this fellow Ilmuddin, he killed the publisher of the Punjabi publisher who brought this book, Rangile Rasool. It was about Prophet's life, and Ilmuddin, a Pakistani, currently Pakistani, but then from Punjab, he killed the publisher. Why? Because that book was about Prophet, and it was blasphemous. Ilmuddin was celebrated, it was back in 1920, celebrated as a Ghazi, as a warrior, as a hero. We saw the repeat in the case of Mumtaz Qadri, who killed the governor Salman Taseer in Punjab because he tried to protect Asia Bibi, who mistakenly who had committed a blasphemy or something like that. So we see these tendencies ever since this doctrine was born or doctrine was documented. So there's a very totalitarian way, and now how to counter these things? I must say that first of all, we need to understand this ideology, that what this ideology looks at. And if they, so it's like a war doctrine, and it has enough mechanisms to dupe others, when required. Suppose if there's not enough majority, you are lacking in numbers, they would try to project themselves or come in the form of charity groups and engaging in charity work. Now, that's where when you have to be very careful, and you don't have to allow such groups, which are like engaging in the extremist and proselytization in the garb of a charity work. For instance, Jamaat-e-Islami in Kashmir. Jamaat-e-Islami engages in orphanage building and some kind of a social work, but it's a terrorist. It's an intellectual arm of Hizbul Mujahideen. It facilitates the work and procurement of weapons and financing of Hizbul Mujahideen. So you have to nip these organizations in the bud, cut right at the roots. For example, recently we witnessed riots in Karoli and in Delhi. Now here, if you are thinking that, well, you cannot, fire on the people throwing stones on the peaceful crowd, okay, because that would lead to a human rights situation. Well, that's a very bad and fallacious approach. You must deal very firmly. You have to order, shoot at sight order, and once you send a firm message, if at least 25 to 30 rioters, violent rioters, acting on the orders of PFI and such other organizations are neutralized, eliminated, or killed, in such cases, that will send out a very strong message from the state, and they would not dare to venture out. As long as you are showing your soft face, you're lenient, they would, they would not simply, start rioting. Tomorrow, they would start terrorizing the peaceful populations residing in normal localities.
But sir, the government has already taken up steps and measures. At this point of time, we see that the effective form of deterrence that is coming up is to break down their house, which has been seen in UP, which has been seen in all the other states as well. So, sir, do you think that instead of these particular kind of deterrences, if you are involved in part of rioting, like for example, we also saw in Jammu and Kashmir, a relative of a terrorist will not be given a job. So don't you think that these kind of deterrences will also help the cause and reduce the amount of radicalization that is already happening?
well, I must say, relatives of terrorists are not really looking for a job. I mean, they have, there is an ecosystem, and there are enough jobs. You can fetch raw material for making bombs. You can, distribute posters spreading radicalization propaganda. But yes, bulldozing the houses of rioters and extremists, it's a good initiative. I really appreciate it. But then it has merely started now. It needs to be put into practice on a massive scale. Besides that, I must say, whenever such radicalization activities take place, it's not just about the crowd. You have organizations, well established and strong organizations who are controlled by ringleaders. There are key coordinators. Maybe say 200, 300, 400, 500,000. You have to prepare that list, and then you have to, I would say, first of all, you need to understand this enemy. You have to alert your intelligence agencies, and they need to be dealt with in the firm manner. And you have various ways. You can use legal mechanisms, which may not be very useful. Then you have political assassinations. You have target killings. You have extrajudicial mechanisms also. Just in the larger good, the larger good of the public security and law and order, you have to resort to such measures, and that's, I guess, if you are able to break those nodes and bust those networks, then you can also, I mean, you can just imagine, you can expect creating a leadership vacuum, and that will bring down these radicalization and violence levels down. And as an auxiliary factor, that will also demoralize and discourage others from falling into the trap of these people.
Yes, sir.
So, Arpan, I would like to tell the viewers about this book, Radicalization in India and Exploration. This is the book which was Vivekananda International Foundation project, and I wrote it in the year. Research was done in 2018, 2017-18, and it came out in 2019. So, luckily, I recommended the banning of Jamaat-e-Islami, which the government did ban after the Pulwama attack. And I had also predicted, this emergence of major suicide bombing trend in Kashmir. Finally, Pulwama happened. I discussed at length about Tablighi Jamaat and its terrorist activities. And there's a complete chapter on PFI in this book.
Okay.
And I strongly recommended a strategy how to deal with PFI. In case if the viewers, maybe the scholars, the students, the people from the security and establishment and the strategic community, if they want to know the nuts and bolts and details of the radicalization scenario, especially the jihadi Islamist radicalization scenario, they can refer to my book. Towards the end, I have given a concept of National Radicalization Index, which is at a theoretical level currently in the book, but it can be developed into a statistical tool. And it will come very handy for the national security establishment and the forces. So it's a tool to measure radicalization levels at a district level, state level, and a country level. So this all I have spoken, mentioned, written in this book, and may be very useful. So what I spoke, that was just something else. I must say the gist. But in case people want to know the details, they can refer to this book. Thank you.
So you have already done the research about PFI that is at this point of time emerging, and they are using it. They are making. They are being categorized, and they are literally working in 23 states in India. And
yes.
Okay.
Interestingly, I was the one who spoke about Turkey's radicalization in Islamist activities in India for the first time. I wrote an article in December 2018 for Haaretz, that's an Israeli paper, about Turkey's Islamization agenda in India. They published it. Then this book also deals in detail with the Turkey's Islamist agenda in India. But then in those days, no one was willing to talk about it. Let me put it very honestly. Even the members of India's strategic establishment, diplomatic community, police forces, senior officers, they would say that, well, Turkey is Mustafa Kemal Pasha's Turkey, it's a secular nation, you're talking nonsense. But then after the abrogation of Article 370, when we saw what Turkey did in sync with Imran Khan at the international level, we rose out, we came back from our slumber, and we came to know about their activities.
Even the universities have been consistent in bringing out these particular kind of agendas. Like we have seen since 2019, if I'm not wrong, we have seen something around 100 plus conferences against Kashmir. as they were
Yes.
try to influence people across the region. And moreover, I've
Yes.
also seen this consistent thing that the number of scholarships that Indian students get from
Yes.
Kashmir are higher in comparison to go
Definitely.
to Kashmir and study, to go to Turkey and study are higher.
Yes.
So
And mostly these scholarships, let me put it here, that the money raised from these admissions, scholarships are given. Besides that, admissions are also given to Kashmiri students in Pakistan and Turkey. And the money raised through those admissions is used for terror funding. Recently, Epoch Times, it's a very famous American news outlet, they interviewed me on this story. And I shared details about the use of MBBS seats in raising money for oiling the terror machinery in Kashmir. So this is a very well entrenched system, and we should really be very careful about these intellectual and academic jihadis, and must show no mercy in dealing with them, in eliminating them academically, intellectually, and every possible way, even legally for that matter.